It has been a while since I did one of these, since I did an Elder Scrolls lore files. This is technically not entirely Elder Scrolls related, but it is using things from Elder Scrolls that I was incredibly fascinated by. Because one of the lore writers from Morrowind, he worked on Daggerfall a little bit, he did a couple other things like on Redguard or whatever. His name is called Michael Kirkbride, and there are 3 terms from Michael Kirkbride's lore compendium that he compiled for most of Morrowind, for a lot of Oblivion, and for tiny portions of Skyrim. The 3 terms are mantling, enantiomorphs, and the mythopoeia. Well, the mythopoeia wasn't a Kirkbride thing, it's just these 2 really, and mantling and enantiomorphs. The mythopoeia is a pretty big thing, it's a pretty big phenomenon, it's a pretty common phenomenon really. It's used all over the place. I'm going to write these down so you actually have, you can actually look at what these are. The title's probably going to be on the title of the video or in the video description maybe, but we're going to write them down too. We're going to write them down. So I have something to point at when I'm talking about it. Mantling. An antiomorph. And mythopoeia. Right? Right. Now, when Kirkbride came up with these 2 things, he was reading into mythology, real mythology, from Mesopotamia, Egypt, a lot of Mesopotamia, Babylonian mythology, especially for a lot of the creation myths for Tamriel. For example, let me recap one of the Tamrielic myths for you. We have Lorkan, who goes to war against Auriel because he tricks Auriel and the rest of the Aedra into making Tamriel. But they bound their spirits into the world and they couldn't leave the Mundus. They couldn't leave the inside area. They were trapped. And so then, after being angry about being trapped and tricked, they fought Lorkan. They fought and warred against him. And then they killed him. And then Lorcan's body was spread and ripped apart. His blood splattered all over the world. His heart fell into Morrowind. We know about that because we found it in Morrowind. That's how the Tribunal got their godly power. The blood of Lorcan was literally the divine spark that gave life to the rest of all this crap. And that story was pulled from Babylon's Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish. I'm not gonna... You can look that one up yourself if you like. I'll tell you a little bit about it, and I'll even write it down. Okay, I'm gonna pull this down and put this one right here. Put that there. Right. So let's write down Enuma Elish. This is, right, that's the Babylonian creation myth. Now, this creation myth isn't the original Mesopotamian creation myth, and I'm going to tell you that. They used a thing called mythopoeia, mantling, and enantiomorphs to make the whole Enuma Elish to begin with. You see, many of the gods featured in the Enuma Elish, like Ea, or Enki, as he's originally known as in his Sumerian name, many of these gods have been around in Mesopotamia for over 1,000 years by this point, even 2,000 years by this point. But then they wrote the Enuma Elish, which repurposed all of this stuff so that they could make and elevate their storm god, Marduk, and elevate him into the leader of the pantheon. Because you see, before the Enuma Elish, before Babylon became the Babylonian Empire, Like, for example, in, let's say, the early dynasty period of Sumeria's kingdom, the early dynasty of Sumeria, let's say about 3000 BC or so, we have the 7 primary deities of Enki, Enlil, Inanna, Nana, and all those guys, right? We got 7 of these big guys. You have a couple smaller divine consists of the god big 7 major 7 city-states, the Uruk period and all that crap, right? Marduk was nowhere to be found. Marduk was found archaeologically in a small farming Babylon area. It was a small farming area. He was a farming deity associated with a spade. He was not a storm god. He was just some sort of spade thing, right? And when Babylon grew, became a big city-state of its own after the Akkadian Empire, Sargon of Akkad, he took over Samaria. After that went away, Akkad and all that went away, Akkad was destroyed. Then Babylon filled in the empty space in between. After centuries and centuries, Babylon became the big power in the area. This is roughly around the 1000 BC marker to 400 BC marker. In that little area, this is when Babylon reigns, right? Babylon's the big name, and the Enuma Elish is the story that they write, that their priests write, basically taking older pre-existing myths, pre-existing gods, pre-existing deities, and repurposing them to give their god the power. Marduk was, he mantled one of Enki's children. Enki has a lot of children in Sumerian mythology. He has a lot of children. One of those children is named Asarluhi, or something like that, right? His name is Asarluhi, right? He's a small water deity. So the Babylonians, they conquer the city-states. They conquer Eridu, which is Enki city, all that stuff. They find out about Asarluhi, and they start to associate Asarluhi with Marduk. Over time, Marduk mantles Asarluhi and becomes Enki's child. And then Marduk becomes the storm god because he starts to mantle a lot of Enlil. Let's write his name down. Enlil. In the original Sumerian story, Enlil was the brother of Enki. And it's arguable, depending upon which story and which area was Enlil, the big brother or the small brother. Either way, Enlil becomes the patron of the gods in Sumerian deity, in Sumerian mythology, right? But he's the storm god, he's the sky god, he's the Zeus of the Sumerian mythology, right? And so Marduk has mantled Asarluhi. Now he needs to become powerful. He needs to have big power. And so they start to write Marduk having a lot of Enlil's powers, right? He starts to write that about, and that's mantling again. He's mantling Enlil's role, he's mantling Enlil's powers. He becomes a storm god. He becomes a big sky god guy type of character. And so through the Enuma Elish, Marduk, now the son of Enki, who has Enlil's powers, right? Before all the world is created, we have two sibling deities. We have Tiamat, ruler of the chaotic areas, and then we have the Apsu, ruler of the non-chaotic areas, deities and stuff. And from them, they birth children. And Enki is one of those children, among others, like Inanna and all those other original Sumerian gods. They are the original first-generation children and all that crap. Enki eventually tricks the Apsu into falling asleep. Enki kills the Apsu and builds his home atop Apsu's corpse. So now Enki becomes lord of the Apsu. He ends up having a son. Marduk is his son. And so Tiamat's angry about Apsu's death and decides to make her child, who is Kingu. That's one of his names. Kingu. Literally Kingu. Tiamat has Kingu wage war. She gives him the tablets of destiny, which gives him superpower and all that crap. And Kingu wages war on the gods. Enki and the gods cannot defeat Kingu. And then Marduk says, I will defeat Kingu, but you must give me all of your power so that I might be strong enough to defeat him. Enki says, I am proud of you, son, yada yada. Let us all give him the power. And so the 50 gods, there are 50 gods here, right? 50 big gods here who all give Marduk their power, right? They give Marduk the power of the 50 names. What this means is that when you invoke any of these 50 names, now you are invoking Marduk's name. He has assumed all of their identities, all of their roles, all of their everything. This is basically Babylon's ancient prototype attempt for monotheism. And had Babylon survived and not been conquered by Persia, they might have become monotheistic after a while, by eventually rewriting all of this through processes like the Enuma Elish and mantling. Marduk would eventually have mantled every single god of the area. He would have taken every single one of their roles. He would have taken every single one of their names, their powers, everything. By the end of the Enuma Elish, Marduk has become so powerful. And he asks Enki to create a servant race because the gods are tired of building things on their own. And so Enki builds humanity out of clay, and he gives them the divine spark of life from the Apsu, makes them all living people and all that stuff. But he needs more. He needs more divine spark. So they use the blood of Kingu. They kill Kingu. Then they use Kingu's corpse. They tear him apart, and they give him into all of the humans and give the prototypes, and that's how humans are made, the Enuma Elish, right? That story, the Big Babylon story, the Enuma Elish, you can look that up on your own, is what was used by Michael Kirkbride to write the Lorkan story. Lorkan is Kingu. Kingu, Lorkan. Or if you want, Lorkan with a C. K or C, it depends. It doesn't matter how you spell it, All these gods in Tamriel have 20, 50 names. That's all mantling and mythopoeia as well. And what is mythopoeia? What I just did here, what the Enuma Elish is a mythopoeia. Because like I said, Enlil originally was Enki's brother. Sarluhi originally was Enki's son. Through processes of the mythopoeia, they rewrite Sarluhi to be Marduk instead. They get rid of these characters, they cut down the cast, and then they give these names to another god, and this god now has all those roles. And every god that you see on this screen here, Enlil, Kingu, Sarluhi, Marduk, all these guys are also enantiomorphs. Not exactly like the Tiber Septim one where you have to have the witness and all this other 3 people. It has to be 3 people. It's not always 3 people. But the process of the enantiomorph is that when multiple gods merge into one identity, you might have a deity who was only a deity of water. You might have had a deity who was only a deity of wisdom. You might have had a deity who was only a deity of crafting. You might have had a deity who was only a deity of magic, right? And so you combine all 4 of those deities, and that's when you make Enki. You combine deities into one. As tribes come together, each tribe has their own deity, but they all might be similar to one another. This deity might be a little bit similar to one another. So the priests look at all this stuff and they start compiling and writing together the mythologies and converging all of these deities into one single deity. And that is how deities like Enki, how Enlil are born. Enlil was born out of a bull cult and a bunch of other stuff as well. And that's how they do this. That's how they made these things, right? And that's what they do in Tamriel as well, because that's what they did in real mythology. And when Kirkbride and others on his team, like Kurt Coleman and all this stuff, look at real mythology, when they're writing the mythology of their world, they took it from real things, the real mythology, and how this stuff was eventually evolved over thousands of years. How gods mantled other gods in the big stratosphere, the ethereal realms of the gods, in the eyes of the people. Gods mantled and changed their names all the time. When a god moves to another region, his name changes, his face changes. But that identity, that core identity of that god, is still the original as well. That's the idea with Akatosh and Ariel. You know, they split the identities. Two gods exist at the same time. That's how it was in Samaria. Well, we have Inanna, who exists as Inanna in Samaria, but then she moves north into Akkad and becomes Ishtar. Inanna and Ishtar exist at the same time, but Ishtar is Inanna. They are the two. It's the same deity. They're two different countries, same deity, different name, different face. But it's the same thing. Is she moved into this region, as adopted by a different nation, given a different name, given a different purpose, but the core identity is the same. That is what Akatosh is to Ariel. That's the myth, the mantle, all that crap, right? Every god in these stories, Greek mythology, Norse mythology, it's all enantiomorphs mantling over long oral periods of time, that by the time people started to write things down, these gods have mantled tons and tons of other smaller deities until they became enantiomorphs of tons and tons of lots of centuries of culture condensed. As the communities grew bigger, the gods absorbed everything into one god, so that the god of Uruk was Inanna. There's like 30,000-40,000 people living in Uruk. All those people had their own gods, their own tribes, their own this, that, and this and that. And we look at all that. We combine it together and all that crap. That's how they did this crap back in the day. You know, that's how they did it back in the day. It's just that simple. But yeah, that's the Enuma Elish, and that is how Marduk was made. And that's Kingu. Kingu is Lorkan, the dead god. Kingu is the dead god, and all that crap. But this is a lot of this stuff has mirrors in real mythology. This is how they did it. This is how Michael Kirkbride did it. I was fascinated by Elder Scrolls lore for years. I absorbed all of this crap for years, right? I learned about the Aedra, I learned about the Daedra, I learned about all this crap, how the Aedra get different names depending upon which point in the world you are at. We have Lorkaj by the Khajiit, Lorkan by the Dunmer. We have Shor by the Nords. I keep the Nords. Yeah, that's their name. I didn't want to say Norse because I knew it wasn't Norse. I knew it was something. I get the name mixed up for him. You know how bad I am with names. But he was Shor to the Nords, and he was Shezar to the Cyrodiil guys. It's all connected. It's all mythopoeia, mantling, and Tiber Septim mantled Lorkan to take Lorkan's place. You walk like a previous god until that previous god must walk like you, and the universe recognizes you as that missing seat. You fill that seat naturally. That's what it is here too. Marduk walked like Enlil until Enlil had to walk like Marduk. Marduk walked like the 50 names until the 50 names had to walk like Marduk, and Marduk was now the supreme deity of Babylonian culture. When, back in 3000 BC, Marduk was just a no-name nobody in a farming culture, in a no-backwater place. It's so fascinating how these gods can evolve from a nobody into the patriarchic deity of a big empire. That's how this stuff works. It's fascinating.